In 14 years of Minecraft's existence, the game lost one crucial element.
This game has gotten increasingly more intense.
That made the game unplayable.
This needs to be fixed.
Its performance. This became so bad that today some of the biggest events, some of the most advanced technical servers, as well as 2B2T, play in version 1.12, a version that came out 5 years ago. What went wrong in the newer versions of the game? But to truly explain what happened to this game, we'll need to understand the basics of lag. This is FPS lag. It can occur when your graphics card can't process frames fast enough, either because you have a bunch of things in the scene to render, or because your CPU is calculating something else and simply can't give the graphics card the data in time. There is also this kind of lag. This can be called TPS lag. Everything that Minecraft does is organized into ticks. Piston takes 3 game ticks to extend, most hostile mobs spawn every few game ticks, fire, crops, ice, essentially the entire game is controlled by TPS. CPU will try its best to calculate a new tick 20 times every second, but once calculating a new tick takes longer than 50 milliseconds, the game starts lagging. And now that we know the basics, we can finally start measuring the performance. Let's start with a process all players have to go through: generating a new world. Starting in a version almost 10 years old, generating a new world would take around 6 seconds. Each new update took a bit longer. 1.13 alone increased the generation time by 70% in a single update. The situation improved in the next few updates, but then this happened. Yes, something as simple as generating a new world now takes 8 times as long as it did just a couple of versions ago. But sure, if you are not a speedrunner and generating new worlds daily, this probably doesn't bother you. What about normal gameplay? Well, I have loaded the exact same world into 13 different versions and tested their performances. Here is an average FPS graph of when the player is standing still throughout different versions, and even though the player is doing absolutely nothing, the performance has still declined over 40% from its peak in the 1.13 update. In the update 1.14, Mojang added a nice graph for detecting lag spikes in the game. The left graph shows you frame times, which indicate FPS lag, and the right graph shows you times needed to calculate each tick, indicating TPS lag. Ideally, you would want all of those bars to be as low as possible, and by all means below this line. Interestingly, we can see when we are doing absolutely nothing, we are increasingly seeing more lag spikes as we progress towards newer versions. One of the most well-known problems in Minecraft has to be generating new chunks, and oh boy do the new versions suffer. I imported the same world into 13 different versions of the game and observed the lag generated from generating new chunks. Starting with the average FPS during my tests, we can see that the average FPS dropped significantly from 170 in 1.7 to only 50 in 1.19. By plotting the lowest FPS encountered during the experiment, we can see that 1.7 didn't experience any FPS drop at all, but with each new version of the game, the FPS drops became more and more severe. This can be clearly seen in the size and the duration of lag spikes, which grew so huge that they didn't even fit on the screen anymore. With such huge lag spikes, the game simply can't keep up at all. By plotting the maximal time is needed to calculate a single tick, we can see how far extended we are from the safe area of 50 milliseconds. If the game can't keep up when we are simply walking and generating a few new chunks, how can we expect the game to be capable of running some of the most advanced farms and the contraptions on the planet? Let's see how Mojang is dealing with this. Update 1.13, codenamed Update Aquatic, was one of many updates intended to improve and refresh modern-day mechanics of Minecraft. But with the amount of changes to the game, this update became notorious for its enormous lag spikes and bad multiplayer performance. The consequences of that update can be still seen today. 2B2T and quite a few technical servers are still using a version that came out more than 5 years ago. Mojang took notice and during the development of their next version tried to improve the situation, and in fact they achieved some very encouraging results. The world generation became 14% faster, the lag spikes were a bit less severe than in the previous versions, and the lowest FPS that I have recorded during my test was also 2 times better. In the same update, Mojang moved the light calculations to another thread, which significantly reduced the horrible lag spikes we were getting before when placing in giant roofs. That trend sadly didn't last long. In November of 2020, Mojang released the Caves and Cliffs update. Prior to this update, the world height was 256 blocks, but after the update, they increased it by 50%, meaning that the entire game had much more blocks to process each tick, which of course had consequences. To all fairness, we are still missing one crucial side of the story. All of my benchmarks were measured on this PC, which by no means is the newest, so we have to ask ourselves, did our machines simply become obsolete with time? In 1965, an engineer by the name Gordon Moore realized that the number of transistors on an integrated circuit roughly doubles each 2 years, and even today, 58 years from when that original observation was made, the technology is still more or less advancing at the predicted pace. But does this mean that our computers are simply outdated?
Good guess, but actually no. In fact, it's all thanks to this.
When Minecraft was made in 2009, the CPUs of that time usually came with just a couple of cores. There was no real need to make the game run across multiple cores, as that is more complicated, and so the game took only advantage of one single core. Over the years, engineers found it harder to make the cores themselves faster, so they started installing more of them side by side onto the same chip. Even though the total performance of a new CPU is much faster thanks to its multi-core performance, the single cores are only 2 times faster, which means that the CPUs simply can't keep up with Minecraft's ever-increasing demands. Since Mojang will probably never rewrite the entire game's code from scratch to implement multi-threading, does that mean that we are doomed to keep losing performance forever? If vanilla Minecraft can't give us playable performance, maybe modding community can save us? I have downloaded the following mods and repeated the already done tests in the latest version of the game. The average FPS from the walk experiment increased from 55 to over 140 average FPS. The lowest FPS during the experiment rose from 5 to over 13 FPS. MSPT decreased from 125 milliseconds to only 48, which means that the game didn't skip any ticks at all. With only 3 mods that do not change the game's behavior in any way, it is possible to dramatically improve Minecraft's performance. This proves that it is not necessary to completely rewrite the entire game from scratch to achieve great performance. But just imagine how much more smoothly the game could be running if it would be properly multi-threaded. Mojang, please grant our wishes and focus one of your next updates on performance. But while we wait for this update to happen, I would like to show you guys an even bigger problem which has severely affected Minecraft's community. Click this video to learn more.